Mr. Kaitila, and I'm in Victoria, Canada. I run a little site called OneGameAMonth.com.
Hello everyone and welcome back. This is Chris DeLeon of Gamkedo, bringing you the Game Developers Like You podcast. The opening music was once again from Danny Baranowski, used with permission. Today's interview is with Mr. Kaitila, who you can find on Twitter as McFunkypants.
I run a little site called OneGameAMonth.com. I wrote it on a lark, as a joke, one time, just based on sort of a New Year's resolution a couple of years ago, that I'd like to stop getting caught in the trap of making giant games with huge design documents that end up never hitting the finish line because they're overly ambitious. And so I told myself, you know what I need to do is get a little more punk and a little less pop, and join tons of game jams and start doing workout games once a month. And I did 24 games in 24 months recently. By doing so, some of these games are throwaways. Some of them actually ended up being much more popular than I expected. It made me a better game dev in general to be able to allow yourself to finish really fast. And so I guess one game a month would be my sort of claim to fame in terms of how I got a few followers on Twitter, right?
Gotcha,
as McFunkypants.
Part of what I like about what you've done with one game a month is if they'll spend a little less time reading articles, more time in the compiler, or Unity or whatever the environment is, then they wind up finding themselves in situations where they have to go Google about better lighting, about better whatever it is, because they're in a situation where they need to know that tonight.
Yeah. If you're a game dev and you're looking for a way to make lots of content, to follow Ira Glass's advice to get past the beginner stage by actually just making stuff and making lots of stuff, join game jams. Look at sites like compohub.net or indiegamejams.com, which are calendars of upcoming game jams. You'll find these days, because game jamming and game dev in general is so popular, there's usually like 5 game jams going on every week.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can always find a cool sort of theme or idea or just a reason to quickly crunch out a practice project. And just like doing push-ups every day, your game dev muscles grow even by doing small throwaway projects. In fact, absolutely. I would argue more than doing big bloated dream projects, masterworks every time. Whenever
people look at the kind of stuff that we're able to do and the amount of time it takes us to do it, the trick is we've dealt with variations on all of the problems involved from previous games.
Yep, and you can rip old code from yourself.
But even if you're not reusing the code verbatim, because the first time we did it was laced with beginner errors, that means that by the time we're doing it for some other project, it's our second or third draft of trying to implement that. And we've kind of learned some lessons from the last time we tripped over ourselves a little bit.
Oh yeah, when I think of how many times I've implemented like an object reuse pool for optimization, I don't want to create a new bullet every time one flies out on screen and then destroy it and release the RAM and then make a new one the next time another one's going to fly out. Of course, you just have 20 in a little pool that you reuse all the time. When I think of how many times I've implemented that little routine now I don't even have to do any Google searches at all. And so just having done something, even poorly, 5 times in a row, you get your own ways of doing it. Actually, the best way to work on a game or a game engine is not to list all the features in a big document that you think it's going to need, but program them on demand as your game forces you to implement a feature. So sometimes, for example, I'm like, well, if I'm going to have all those entities flying around, I might have to do some sort of BSP tree or a quad tree to optimize my collisions. Well, I won't implement it at the beginning. I'll just throw all those entities into one giant array, and guess what? Half the time it was fast enough anyways, and it was the rendering that was the bottleneck for frame rate. And I never had to even bother bringing in those types of functionality. I would like to extend that advice for game devs, even thinking about optimizing almost all the time. Almost never do it, because you really can brute force almost everything in this day and age. And your time is more valuable than a couple extra nanoseconds of your CPU's time. So don't worry about frame rate if it's going to take you 20 more hours to up the frame rate by 5, unless it's just so mission critical. Because your life is so short, I'd say live with the slightly lower frame rate. Don't stress about it and say, hey, I was done a week earlier.
Well, and the thing I'll often use to stress that is that oftentimes, because what we're building is a sort of creative endeavor, there's always things we can't tell until it's implemented. Inevitably, it always winds up shifting, changing directions. You might wind up ripping out the thing you were doing. And so the faster you can get it in there, the better you can evaluate, was it worth even keeping? And if you need to go back and optimize it, you always can later. But just because there's always a chance that we're going to make something and throw it out anyway, you don't want to spend any more time on that than you have to answer the question, is this something I want? Is this something that's mission critical?
And so, I always tell people when they're programming things to have a design document should never be more than 1 or 2 pages long.
For me, it's a one-sided bolded list and then like a mock-up screenshot. That's my design doc. I encourage people to.
Oh, it's great. I just use a black marker and a blank sketchbook to design an app. And it usually just fits on one page, but I might have done a few versions of it until I like it.
Yep.
And then program features on demand, not on guesswork for what future things your game is going to do. Like making a level editor just for yourself. No. Just do like an array of ASCII characters to begin with, that you actually have in the code. It's just like dots and dashes. And sometimes that really can be enough for a game that's equally good because, of course, your end players don't know what your source code looks like and don't care. So I mean, there are all sorts of those types of issues. Really, who I really am, the game dev that is Krister Kaitila. So much like you, I've got this like huge list of old projects stretching from the 90s doing BBS stuff, right?
Yeah.
I make most of my money doing client freelance game dev for other companies. Typically, I'm NDA restricted, non-disclosure agreement. So a lot of times the things I make, I'm not even in the credits. People put their own brand, their own logo on it. And it's just a nice little game that somebody uses usually for kind of marketing purposes or as a giveaway. But also I've done more things now related to the education of game devs, including, I've published a couple paper books on the subject.
You want to call out what those are?
Oh, well, sure. I've got the Game Jam Survival Guide, which is a cute little book that actually ended up selling way more than the giant one I spent way more time on, which was a Stage 3D Flash 3D game programming book, both published by Pact. And you can search for my name, Krister Kaitila, on Amazon, and you'll get some stuff. And beyond those, I've written a whole bunch of tutorials on, places like Tuts Plus.
Do you also help run GameDev?
Yeah, I did for a little over a year, and I've just recently stepped down, more because they were changing direction and sort of merging all the game dev articles in with all the rest, and because I've sort of been hoping to spend more time on projects that are closer to my heart, because I don't really want to run a website. It was fun. I was the editor, right?
Nice.
So I was given a budget every month to commission tutorials on game dev from my peers. So I would go on Twitter and I'd say, hey, does anyone know about, the new Unreal scripting language? We want to get a tutorial done. We'll pay you a few $100 for it. And that was a lot of fun. And I ended up meeting a whole bunch of people, including educators like you and all the rest, and started getting into the game dev education, e-learning tutorial-based stuff. You know what? It turns out that doing this stuff has actually got me a lot of great business opportunities. And last year, two major projects that I did that were pretty quietly released, really, were a platform game starter kit for HTML5 game devs who maybe are beginners. And it's a whole project that you can compile for the web and for Windows 8 App Store and Windows Phone and all the rest. That is just like a little, Super Mario Brothers thing. And then another one that was a bit bigger, which was a tower defense, a tower game starter kit. Both those terms you can probably search for and maybe find, but it was really fun being funded to create something that we would make open source. And it's totally like MIT open source, and you can use it. You don't even have to credit. And these were great projects because I've started to, because of OneGameAMonth and source code releases like this, get people sending me like thank you letters, people I've never even known saying, hey, I just wanted to let you know I made my first game because of you. And Chris, that's something you can really speak to. I mean, that's the best feeling in the world, right?
It totally is.
There's an art exposition at a place called lightgrayartlab.com. Gray is spelled with an E in this one. lightgrayartlab.com/dream-arcade. And what it is about a dozen artists who don't know how to code all got together at this artists collective, and they're using my platformer game starter kit for HTML5 as is. So everyone's sprites are going to be, the same size. It uses the same engine, but they're all making an artistic platformer to showcase their pixel art skills.
Okay.
And so it's going to be this awesome thing that, of course, fills me with pride to think that some artists have actually successfully made some nice, Braid style, nice art platformers to show the world at a little art show in reality. Using some source code that I've made. I mean, that made the project totally worthwhile to me. For the people that have already made a bunch of games and had some level of success, I would encourage them to try what Chris and I have done, which is help other people make games. You might find it incredibly rewarding, because I know we have. One thing I've found, and I know it's probably the same with you, is that you can get two different kinds of payment for your work. And one is it's measured in dollars, and it's usually client work, and it's maybe not always super cool. It's maybe not always exactly what you want to do, but then you survive. You have food on the table, right? But then there's the other kind of payment, and that's It's almost kind of a what did I do with my life? Lying on your deathbed. Thank goodness I did a few of these cool things payment.
Yeah.
And it turns out that helping people make games is something that now, as I look back to a couple years of doing this, from hosting game jams and charity game jam, which I run, and just little things like that, I realized that I've had more impact there on the lives of other human beings, but also on my own sort of pride and self-definition than I have in the games I've made.
Oh yeah.
Because it's such a hit-driven industry that, I mean, I think I've made maybe about 40 games, and I've certainly written over 100 pieces of software I've been doing this for a while. I'm 41. I first got paid to do like a BBS game by a guy in Turbo Pascal in high school, right? And so that was like when the world was in black and white, and we saved our data on audio tapes. So it's always a good idea to try a new engine anyways. You don't want to get stuck in only using what you use. Otherwise, I'd still be in C++, OpenGL, wondering why it took me 7 months to do what I can do in Unity in a weekend. And so, I was making games early for money, even when it was just like for, video game money or whatever, right? Just a few $100. Yeah, this is the best job ever. And so because of that early success, and I'm, your high school nerd who loves to code anyways, and did little game demos, but because it became an informal freelance kind of job that I could do from home, I realized, okay, this is the beginnings of a wicked life.
Yeah.
And so I built on that idea, right? And that's why I became an indie game dev. I'm able to not work on a Monday morning if I don't want. Like if I want to go to the beach because it's a beautiful day, take my little son and go make sandcastles, I actually can. You really can make a living making video games, and you don't even have to be the best of the best. Now, all this positivity must get really annoying for the people that have tried it a few times and worked for 6 months to make $200. And that's actually what the norm is, because it's a hit-driven industry, just like trying to be a poet professionally.
Absolutely.
Or a rock star,
trying to paint, right? Or something, or, the barriers are down. People can make the stuff if they've got the time, if they've got the interest in doing it. There's all kinds of different ways to try to answer and address that problem, because it's like my focus has oftentimes been on steering people towards, well, all I can say for sure is I can help you learn how to do it. As to whether or not you're going to go get rich doing it, I'm not making any promises there.
That's why I love what you do specifically, Chris, because this is a dream job. A lot of people think they're only a success if they can measure their success in number of sales, or, DAU or MAU or whatever.
ROI.
Right? In ROI, in how many people are paying you money to make your game. But if you can even be able to make games itself, just like being able to write good poetry or paint a good painting, there's a joy and intrinsic enjoyment in the creation of games that, to me anyways, is far, far greater than the financial rewards. And if I wanted to make good money, I'd still be doing database stuff. But all of us have very finite hours left before we die.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm certainly not getting rich doing this.
Yeah.
And I don't care at all. Right.
Yeah. So sometimes,
because life is too short.
The crazier thing, in the same way that, there's people who get into game development thinking that it's a get rich quick scheme. And of course that rarely pans out.
It's a get poor slow.
Yeah. Is the folks outside the game industry who, we'll be out. I remember, heck, we were out at, I don't know, it was Macy's, JCPenney's, whatever, just trying on dress shirts or whatever. And they're like, what do you do? I was like, oh, I make video games. They're like, oh, you're going to be like Bill Gates. I'm like, A, Bill Gates never had anything to do with video games. B, no. That is absolutely out of touch with reality.
And I think the humble realization that even if you're very talented, you're a great coder and a great artist, and you still have, a 1% chance of getting a hit, means that instead of getting all bitter about your prospects, everyone's all full of doom and gloom in articles these days.
Yep.
You have to realize how incredibly lucky people are that they can even make $500 on a game, because tons of people would happily line up in droves to do it for $0 just because they've always wanted to. It's a dream. It's a life dream type of career. And just because, recent salary survey, for example, came out by the IGDA that said that the average indie game dev who's serious about it and has actually published a game is about $11,000 a year. But 57 or so % of people who identify, they say, I am a game dev. When you ask them what they are, they're making about $550 a year.
Yeah.
And that's the thousands of beginners, but also pros who like you and me have made 40 games. But we do a lot of these projects we do for fun, and that actually can be enough. And so I think so many people getting into game dev are setting themselves up to burn their savings as they quit their jobs and try to make a go of it for 2 years until the money runs out. The vast majority are going to be really disappointed. But imagine instead going into game dev with a day job. Humbly accept a day job and then I get to make games every single weekend and look at this wicked game, and it turns out my 12th game, hey, look, 200,000 people played it and people are loving it. I'm going to work on more. Maybe then you will get that hit and make a lot of money.
I mean, Notch had a day job when he was starting Minecraft.
Ludum Dare alumni, right?
Sure.
He was totally doing game jams when he was a nobody.
And had been making games. I think that's where some of the frustration is, too, that we see sometimes. You know, some people I'll talk to in interviews and otherwise, they're actually not the people who kind of got in this get rich quick. They've been making games for decades, kind of like you or I. And then they still haven't yet had their moment or whatever. It's heartbreaking. They've made so many awesome things that they got to make whatever the heck they wanted. I think they forget to be grateful for how far they've come and their ability to make out of nothing this thing that they wanted to exist.
Yeah, and I think the perspective of the value of an effort is not necessarily measured with a dollar sign beside it is really important, because just to be able to have made a game ever, tons of people in the world that would love to trade places with you, even if you think you're a failure right now.
One of the other things I've found coming out of these interviews is that there's people who haven't been making games that long, but have already realized that by having made anything, by finished anything, they're already in a position to help others into it.
Oh, yeah. The finish line at all is a huge accomplishment that easily 90% of game projects never get. Just finishing something is, I would say, the number one skill that a game dev needs to have to be able to be a real game dev, someone who can actually publish games. And to do that, I mean, firstly, there's the KISS rule, you keep it simple and all that. Grand plans re-envisioned in a more humble and perhaps a little bit disappointing way. I know I often look at some of my past work, honestly, maybe all of it, but some of it's imposter syndrome. And I'm like, it's terrible. I'm such an amateur. And I'm like that guy in the old Sesame Street who would bash his head on the piano every time he tried to play a piece. But you have to almost like to suffer if you want to be a game dev who's been in it for more than a decade. And the way you like to suffer, when I say suffer, I mean work hard and not necessarily succeed every time, is to think of it as a kind of engineering, because of course programming is a kind of, it's software engineering. And imagine instead you were making rocket engines. Maybe the first 20 tries it would blow up in your face. It would never even get into the sky. It would certainly never reach the stratosphere, right?
Sure.
But it can still be valuable science to have done that, because only version 10 is really going to be good enough to have overcome the problems that you naively thought you'd be able to do on the first try.
Of course, yeah, there's the old Edison thing of, he's not discouraged. He's figured out 10,000 things that didn't work.
Yeah, that's one other common thing that I think you and I both find when we talk to people that have made a lot of games, is the people who are experts at things actually realize how little they do know. And when you first begin coding, man, I thought I was like God's gift to coders. I was super elite. Nobody in my class could even keep up. Oh, look at this guy. He's already got a job and he's still I thought I was hot stuff. Well, guess what? 2 decades later, I realize I barely know anything. And it takes a sort of a humble look at yourself to realize. And I know I've got some big gaps in my skill set. One of them certainly is art.
Yeah.
And so this last sort of year and a half, I've been forcing myself to learn how to, animate a walk cycle in 3D with little polygons, little, skeleton bones sort of thing. Yep. And I realize, how incredibly labor intensive even sculpting a door is. Yep. When my initial plan was to make an entire huge building in one afternoon. And I'm like, well, I got the door handle done. I too have published games that use all just like stuff from opengameart.org, for example. And it's games that I've been very proud of. There's one that I made called Rubba Rabbit. It's the example game for the platformer game starter kit that I was mentioning. Mm-hmm. And it uses art from OpenGameArt, because then I was able to just focus on optimizing the render loops and stuff. And it looks awesome. And people are like, whoa, that's really good. How did you do that? And I always feel a little sort of bit of disappointment in myself, because I'm like, actually, I've played about a dozen games with that exact jumping red rabbit now. And I'm like, oh yeah, my game's awesome. And I play one that's exactly the same thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I use clip art. So use clip art, but plan to replace it with your own art. And I think you'll be more proud of the final product.
There's this old word of wisdom of, if it's placeholder, it should be very annoyingly obvious that it's placeholder, or it won't get replaced. I mean, when push comes to shove at the end of a project, you look at, okay, what do we have to fix and change before we can release this? And if it's like passable, you're like, you know what, that rocket launcher will stay.
I know, because you're burnt out. You just want to be done.
Totally.
You're like, okay,
but if it's a bright orange rectangle, you're like, you know what, we have to replace that. And
I always recommend a full bright magenta, that nasty purple that nobody uses for anything but
it used to be used for transparency on what.
Yeah, because you'd never actually want to see it in a game. But use something so awful that you'll replace it is probably great advice. I think every game dev should try to get better at art. And don't be afraid to put out programmer art at first. Use Photoshop or 3D Studio Max or Maya or whatever, or Blender, and force yourself to do art, even if you think you stink, because you do that a bunch of times and you'll be surprised how much better you get. In my current project, I've said, okay, I may not be that great at art, but I'm going to force myself to try to do cats as the characters. We're talking, cats with huge wrenches and, magician cats carrying books and all the rest. And so by forcing myself to, just to kind of commit to that look, that little bright, colorful, Super Mario style art with cats. I mean, it's going to look like Star Fox or something probably, but at least then you've established a look and feel for your game. And actually, I at times have told people, try making the game using just circles. Yeah. Just circles of different color. The tiles, instead of tanks that you're going to have it eventually, it's a circle with a line just so you know which direction it's facing, and make the game feel fun. And when you've got over all those issues of, then when you do the art, you won't make as much throwaway art because you'll find, all I needed was 5 frames and 3 different colors because your game's already sort of done. And so, some people say, use great art from the beginning because your game screenshots along the way always look good. And that's the counter argument to that. And that's just as valid. But I always like to just I just say, I'm making it with colored rectangles until it sort of works. And then I know how much art I actually need to make. And you do less wasted art along the way that way.
I like to at least try to do, if not animated, but just a still frame for my characters as part of that process. And unanimated helps me figure out the personality of it.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, just the dude is just sliding around. There's no walk cycle yet, but how big they'll be, and the approximate, and also the screenshot will still look good. No, it's not animated. I love making games. I love programming. One thing that I almost never do is marketing and telling other people about my game. And there actually exist finished playable games that aren't even on my website because I need to get around to putting them up on there. I can remember a time where a game that is available nowhere because it's been lost. I mean, it was on a floppy disk at one point. 2 of my friends played it at my house on my computer. And the fact that they thought it was cool and went back to play it a couple more times made me so happy. That happy memory there made that project worthwhile, even though now it doesn't even exist. And talking about not existing, it always reminds me of a piece of advice that I tell game devs who are starting out now and they've got their passion projects. And that's that in a few years' time, you might only have the screenshots for the game you're making right now. You'll have the EXE and maybe someone out there will download it and install it. But if it's, a decade later and it, your old game only runs on Windows 98 and nothing past that, or requires some old video driver that doesn't exist, or an operating system no one's using anymore, or it's stored on a medium nobody uses anymore, it sounds so old-fashioned to worry about that, but you'd be surprised how often old projects, you've got an MS-DOS executable. How many people really are downloading them and running them in DOSBox to check them out? No, it still has worth in your portfolio merely as a write-up and a screenshot. So always take lots of screenshots of your games and write a little case study, even if it's 1 paragraph long that describes what it is. Because in 10 years' time, that actually might be all you have from the project.
It's part of why I've also taken a liking to recording whenever I can video from my games being played.
It's brilliant, because that might be the only time. Most people won't actually install your game, especially 9 years later.
Well, and of course now people often expect to go to a URL, have a game run in browser, no matter what the platform, and leave the URL. The whole barrier of I'm going to download a zip file, unzip it, open it up, find something in there, configure it, run an executable. No
one's doing that anymore.
No one's doing that anymore.
I only do it as a favor to people who ask me to test their games. So it's a download, because of course my browser probably pops up a bright red window telling me you better not do this. This is not a commonly downloaded file. Then then my virus checker. Then
click the little arrow next to it to tell it you mean to keep this file.
And then I'm like, uninstaller. You mean you're gonna touch my registry and stuff? No, come on, standalone zip file at least, so I can just run it off my desktop. And it's so funny. But in this day and age, barrier to entry and how much work you require of your players is directly proportional to how much they've played or paid. If they paid $20 or more for your game, they will go to the trouble to install it and maybe even they'll also make it all the way through your tutorial, no matter how boring it is, because they've committed themselves to try to extract the value out of it. But if they've got your game for free or for $1, you have to hit them with your best content in like 30 seconds because they're not going to do any work. Now, some people will, but just talking stereotypes and generalizations, essentially you're going to have to make it so it just runs without any installation at all. And that means either, as an app, or even better, just straight online, just go to this URL and play. You don't have to download anything. And that's why HTML5 is going to be big, even though it's imperfect and it can be a real pain for some types of programmers. I personally love it because I don't want to force people to download a zip file and worry about viruses.
Sure.
Just go to this URL, play the game, tell me what you think.
Yeah.
But I just like making them and putting them out there and not having to worry about what turns out to be at least 50% more hours.
Oh, yeah. Even on games with huge budgets that people have already heard of the other games in the franchise and the companies building them have a established brand reputation.
In a lot of the major successes, both mobile and AAA, and even large indie, those small companies with a dozen people, I think they're putting their working labor hours into marketing the game, going to conferences, creating videos and trailers and screenshots and press releases. And in the same time that you could make 4 games, you can make one of equal quality and telling everyone, running a Kickstarter, Dance Monkey Dance,
sure,
sending out press releases and all that. So it's tough. And sometimes I think I just enjoy making games so much that I'm willing to forego a large marketing spree afterwards for the games because I'm already excited to start working on the next game.
Yeah.
So I'll just stick it up there and good enough. And the fun thing is that once you've built up enough of a portfolio, you get people coming to you to say, hi, we're XYZ.com Bubble Corp. We've got massive money and nobody on staff knows how to make anything. Could we hire you to like white label this game with our logo on it, and we'll pay you $20,000 for a couple of weeks of work? And of course, that's not happening to me every 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
But these types of opportunities really do exist. And these are on games that I initially made totally uncommercially for the joy of making the game. And then when it's done, it can serve you in the future. I didn't sell it at all. Anyone can play it for free, but it got me an awesome client gig.
Yeah.
And I think doing client work is very often not mentioned when people are talking about how to make a living as a game dev.
Oh, yeah, because a lot of people I talk to who've been doing it commercially, semi-invisibly, and as much as it's not their brand connected to it, they're bearing contracts, whether it's a small studio of multiple people, whether it's an individual. Certainly when I was doing commercial game development as an independent person between startup world and grad school years, it was a balance between there's things I'm doing for the outside world that's consistent pay, and then there's my own things that are all kind of swinging for the fences, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't.
Yeah,
often doesn't, sometimes does.
Isn't that so fun? Like, it's so smart, I think, to have a little bit more of a regular gig that's not necessarily the game you want to make, but somebody out there is actually paying you to make it.
Well, you're learning a lot on someone else's dime. You're always learning to be doing anything.
And what I find is even with very well-prepared people who really care and put the effort in and they have the budget and they market it, most games are still not a success and didn't pay for their investment just because, it's a hit-driven industry, just like trying to make a pop record.
Sure.
And so I would much rather, have done that work and got paid for it and walked away. And then I don't even have to market afterwards. And I'm done making the game.
Their problem.
I walk away and say, good luck. I truly want you to succeed. And I'm glad I don't have to bother marketing this.
I think people don't always understand or appreciate why the publisher branding layer exists. To the fact that so many games don't return on their investment. And so that whole layer can exist because the hits help compensate for the many that don't.
That's right. And most of us are never going to be Notch, no matter how good we are.
Yeah.
And that's okay. You really can do it, and we're proof.
This has no discredit to him. Amazing individual, amazing accomplishments, done great for the game industry. But even it's hard to tell if Notch will ever be Notch again. Any given game he releases, he's working at it just like anybody else is. The fact he has name recognition, the fact he's got money to spend.
It'll help with marketing just a little.
It'll certainly help. But as to whether or not it sticks with people, every time it's a fresh challenge.
And now that he doesn't have to worry about money, and I don't really worry about money either, even though I'm not a billionaire. But once you're not really worried about just survival, you've got sort of a steady thing, that's when you're able to say, I've been a game dev for over a decade, and that's something you can be really proud of, even if you're not rich, even if you have a used car with a crack in the window like I do, right?
Yeah. I've got some scratches on the back of my car.
Life is so good being an indie game dev that even though I'm not rich, I think there's a good example here of a lifestyle that could make you very happy.
Question from a Twitter person. It's kind of a silly one.
I love it.
And this is from Philip Chu. He's at Fugu Games, Fugu Games, for at McFunkypants in particular. How did you pick the name McFunkypants?
Oh, well, okay, there's 3 reasons. Firstly, when you first go online, especially before the era of everyone being forced to use their real names for things like Google Plus logins or whatever. Now that, that's been rescinded, but before you were supposed to use your real name. You were supposed to have a handle. And I mean, I come from the BBS era where nobody ever even typed their real names anywhere for no good reason, except that it sounds cooler to have a call sign, kind of like you're an Air Force pilot, right? So McFunkypants is my way of saying that I don't take myself all that seriously. I'm willing to laugh at myself. And, I'm not like Mr. Super Cool Joe. But also because I make music, and it can be read MC Funky Pants.
Oh, brilliant.
Right? So McFunkypants makes games. MC Funky Pants makes amateur music, sort of, funky disco techno or something. You can go to SoundCloud.
Googling either brings up both.
Oh, yeah. You can go to soundcloud.com/McFunkyPants and listen to 2 full albums and a whole lot more, and I just do that for fun too, right? So, yeah, so it's 2 handles in one. And also because when I'm McFunkyPants online, I can be the gregarious, personable, chatty extrovert that in reality I'm not. I'm actually kind of like a shy dad who kind of prefers just to stay at home and live a quiet, simple life. Yeah. But that dude doesn't have thousands of Twitter followers,
Right.
So that's one way to do it, I guess. It's my superhero costume. It's
Nice.
my Batman mask. And I think a lot of people, it's the same. That handle allows them to hype their wares more than the humble real you would in real life. Yeah, you can boast more when you're McFunkypants, but when I'm Kaitila, I feel embarrassed to boast about the things I've done.
Yeah, it's certainly when I go to GDC and other things, it was always much easier for me to speak on behalf of one of my game clubs as to I'm here representing the Game Creation Society, or I'm here I'd like to tell you about VGDev. A lot easier message than let me tell you about myself. Which is like, who cares?
And in the end, we're talking about the same stuff, but it sort of just allows you to do it in a more confident way, I think, and so I love it that way, I guess.
Nice. Okay, well, great. And one question I always like to end on: people out there either thinking about making games or trying to get into making games better. What's your words of wisdom, encouragement? How do you what do you want to leave them with today?
Okay, I'd say you absolutely can make a living making video games, but you don't have to love it and to do it a lot. So the key to getting good at what you love is to actually do what you love. And if you do a little bit on your game project every single day, even if it's just a sketch in a sketchbook, and you keep showing up day after day after day, you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the smartest person in the world. You don't have to be the most elite programmer in the world, and you don't have to be the world's most talented artist. By showing up every single day for years and years and years on end and actually just making stuff, you will get better and better and better, and you're guaranteed a degree of success if you keep doing what it is that you love to do. To do that, you need a way to mitigate risk. And one way to do that is to humbly accept things that are jobs that might not necessarily be exactly what you want. And client work, freelance game dev client work exists. There's a lot of it. There are more people looking for coders to make games for them than there are coders who advertise their ability to do contract work. For some reason, a lot of indies seem to only make their own passion projects, usually burning up their own savings to do so. You can fund your dream game project by doing client work on the side, and you can charge a heck of a lot more money per hour than what the average game dev makes on their dream project. So make your money making games for other people, and make yourself happy by making games for yourself.
Right. And as just one last practical tip, if I can get it out of you, do you have any tips for people as to how they find contract work? Let's say they've never even thought of it before. They're totally sold and it's worth doing. What do you tell them as to how do they begin that search?
The number one thing is to know that it's better to be the answer to someone else's search than for you to search. And that means making a portfolio. So portfolio is king. And if you make a good portfolio with lots of games on it, lots of screenshots, each of them saying, hey, I can make a game like this for you, you'll actually get people cold calling you. You'll be getting emails from simple Google searches of people looking for people to make games. You don't have to go find them. They'll find you if you have a portfolio. So portfolio.
Gotcha. If they don't have their games online, put them online, even if it's just screenshots, whatever it is.
YouTube videos of your game are enough. Yep, YouTube videos or screenshots are enough. Just put your work in a visible place, and people will come to you with business opportunities. It really does happen.
As well as, and I want to just call one little tweak on that they also want to mention somewhere that they're open to taking client work, because so many people out there aren't necessarily, you don't want your client to have to wonder before they email you that like, yes, I will do contract work.
I would put it right on the very first line above the fold on your website. Say, this is who I am. I'm available for business opportunities. This is what I've done.
Rock on. Well,
right
sweet.
On.
It's
Chris, it was such an honor to finally get to meet you. Love what you do. So thank you so much. I'm so impressed with this, and I think, at least I hope it's going to be like super popular because it's kind of fun. All right, well, Chris, thanks so much, and have an awesome day.
Thank you, man. Have a good one.
All right, talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you find these beneficial, if you find these interesting, if you're looking forward to the next episodes, please take a moment to click that subscribe button. Look me up on iTunes. Hopefully, if you like them, you'll rate, you'll leave a review. So this is Chris DeLeon for Game Devs Like You. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen, but other game developers like you.